a variety of reasons, was not going to be a place where a child could be discharged back to. So I understand that concern from the institution's point of view, having been the adolescent social worker one time myself in those situations. But at the same time, everybody agreed that the child absolutely needed service and needed it right now. It was a crisis, and something needed to be done. And what was occurring in a couple of these situations, and they were all, coincidentally, I got about 4 families all on the same weekend with the same sort of problems. The families were being sent back and forth between the Children's Aid Society and the IWK. And on the one hand, they were saying, talk to the Children's Aid Society and get them to intervene and remove the child from the home. And Children's Aid were saying, this isn't a protection case. This isn't a child who is in need of care and protection. In one case, it was a parent who was actually in need of care and protection from an out-of-control child. So we had this situation, but the hospital wouldn't admit, because their concern was, if we get this child in the hospital, we don't know where we're going to send the child to next. And it seems to me that there is this kind of, and I don't know what drives that. If part of what drives that are some financial considerations. People, I know that the families involved felt that it was financial considerations, whose budget was the child's care going to come out of. But I think that there needs to be greater coordination between agencies that look after children, so that they don't become in competition with or in conflict with each other about who's going to take care of the children. And so I know that this is known within the department, and I want to know what the department is doing to resolve those kinds of situations, so that, on Friday night at 7 o'clock, there's some mother somewhere in the city who is scared to go home from work because she's been beaten up by her son, who's 11 years old and bigger than she is.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
One of the reasons that we're funding the crisis intervention teams is to try to stop the kinds of situations that the member is talking about. I think that I would be foolish to say that government departments moving people around between them was going to end, but the idea here is that the overlap would end. Like we have agreed with community services and talked to them about if a child or an adult or someone needs care, then it has to come to health for the care. We also, well, all the people who are working on this project in the department, they want the best outcomes for the child and the family, and are very well aware that sometimes it's a situation with the parents or the caregivers that is causing some of the issues with the child. Sometimes it's the other way around, but you can't just work on one part of the problem, because it's usually not just one problem. And they've long recognized the issue of needing a hospital bed, and that we're hoping that this new center, it may not address every issue, but that it will not. It won't mean the IWK has to admit a person to a bed in the hospital and not know what to do afterwards. because children will be able to stay in this facility upwards of 12 months, I believe, and the child will not be taken into protection if what they need is essentially health care. And but obviously the child who is beating up the mother or the father or the aunt does need health care. Does need health care and has to be assessed as to what that effective health care would be. And I know that these situations are not uncommon. Mothers particularly being terrified of their own out-of-control children. There had a recent case where a mother was begging that her child be taken away, but had no place to send the child. It's a fairly desperate situation, more so if you don't have money. But even if you do, it's very tough to find a place or a way to deal with this situation. And we really hope that we'll be going a long way to addressing those needs with this new money. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank the minister. I want to ask about addiction services as well, and I don't know if this is something that you'll be able to answer at this point or not, because I know that these services have been devolved to the districts. But I want to ask about the waiting lists for addiction programs across the province. What are the waiting lists like?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Again, we know there are some wait list issues in certain areas, but we can get that information from the districts. We did put nearly $2 million last year into addiction services for women and children, but again, that is a growing problem in some parts of the province, and it's a growing problem with younger and younger children. I know I was speaking with, this may not be news to some members of the House, but the head of addiction services at Fisherman's Hospital was telling me they have a growing problem down there of Ritalin addiction among younger and younger children, they're getting a hold of their own pills, or the kids who have ADD and are taking Ritalin for that are sharing them with their friends, crushing them up and snorting them and so on and so forth. And there's sort of a mini epidemic down there with some fairly young children. That being said, detox is readily available, but that only takes care of the immediate. And in the long term, if people need treatment for their addictions, again, we probably fall short, but we have put more money in, and I'll get the figures for the member.
The member for Halifax Needham.
Thanks very much. And although at this, I can't remember the particular drug. It's not Dilantin. It's that horrible narcotic that's very Dilaudid. That's it, Dilaudid. There's another drug that is thought to be even more addicted, and there's been a fair amount of publicity around Cape Breton, a part of Cape Breton that has been experiencing this problem. And I'm wondering if the department has any plans. I know in my constituency we have the community-based methadone clinic. Generally speaking, what people tell me is that clinic has been very effective. They had the potential problem in their funding coming to an end. The Capital District, I believe, is providing funding to keep them going for another year, and then hopefully some planning will be done to have them incorporated into the mainstream of the capital's budget. But what about in the Cape Breton area? Is there a similar program there? Are there any plans to make a similar program available if there isn't a program there? What can people in that area look forward to? And how do you deal with, what's the department's strategy to deal with this highly addictive substance now in that community? Is it a question of monitoring prescriptions and who's prescribing? What's happening around that?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Yes, I confirm that Capital will be, helping to administer the methadone program here. We are funding that for this year because taking away services that are working is just not on. I mean, it's not. We can't do that. What we would like to expand the program to Cape Breton, where obviously, again, you would have a critical mass of people able to take advantage of that program, and but we would like to do that. We plan to do that in the future, although not this year. This year, the priority was making sure that the program in Halifax wasn't cut. In terms of this new drug, part of it is monitoring prescriptions. We do that anyway. I think the member knows that we've had a fairly effective system in place since I believe it was 92, anyway, or 93, the early 90s, of the narcotic prescriptions having to be done in triplicate, and there's a way to keep track of them that way. And if you want to go in and see where something might be going off base, you can do that. This new drug, I can't remember if it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago, where it became quite public about the Dilaudid problem in Pictou County, for example. And this is a new one to us, and we have discovered through looking at the prescription forms that the prescribing of this OxyContin is much higher in Cape Breton than it is in mainland Nova Scotia, to a considerable degree. That doesn't necessarily mean it's an inappropriate form of pain control. It's just that there is more of it being prescribed at Cape Breton, and we don't know why yet, but that can be looked into. I think the member knows that there are cases where doctors may inappropriately prescribe. There are also probably plenty of cases where kids steal from their parents or their grandmother or whatever and get this stuff. And I'm told the biggest problem with one of the big problems with the OxyContin is that although it's not, it's a potent pain medication, but its use again involves crushing it and using it in another form, using it in another way, not the way it was intended for pain control. And I believe there's actually 3 different brand name drugs that are being prescribed that contain the active ingredient in that. For some reason, that has caught on in Cape Breton, and we're not letting go of that problem. We have got some statistics on the prescribing, and there's something about it that makes it more easily altered than other narcotics, and it provides some kind of a high that has become very popular. And the manufacturer of the drug is also working on this problem. So it's not going to end right away, but we are working on it. I don't believe, or haven't been told, if anyone knows whether or not methadone would be suitable for that particular addiction or not. I know it's fairly well known as a good way to to control those who've been addicted to heroin or morphine, but I'm not sure about its effectiveness with this particular drug. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I recognize the member from Halifax Needham who has 3 minutes left.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I guess I'd like to use the last few minutes then talking about drug coverage for Remicade and for the Alzheimer patients. You know, most provinces, I think, now have moved to adopting the drugs that are being used to sort of hold off the advancement of Alzheimer's disease. They have been found to be effective in doing that. People who are afflicted with this illness, and particularly their family members, I think, are very anxious to have a decision from this government on that, and they've waited a long time. So I want to ask the minister when we might hear that your government, in fact, will be including Alzheimer drugs, these drugs for Alzheimer patients.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The committee of the Atlantic Formulary looking at this issue has made a recommendation that is going to be discussed by the Atlantic deputies. It's either next week or the week after. In this particular case, we do want to work together and come to a common decision. Provinces can, of course, decide on their own to go ahead, but I believe I've said before that we're all very concerned that if we go ahead and okay these drugs for use, that there be protocols around their use, and that we undertake some physician education before we allow them to be prescribed willy-nilly. There's the medical issue of a particular drug may not work for a particular kind of dementia, or it may work, but it may only work for a certain length of time, and a person may not need to be on it forever. They are very expensive, and we would like to make sure that they're used in the situations that are most appropriate. And this isn't in the briefing notes, but there is another issue, and that is we don't want to create false hope in people that, okay, we've got these great new Alzheimer's drugs, and all of a sudden, things are going to be a lot better for everybody, because that won't be the case. They will work for some people in some situations, but if you watch a lot of American television and drug advertising, you would think that some of these things are going to solve all your problems, and yes, they'll help sometimes, but it isn't going to be, a cure-all for everyone with Alzheimer's disease. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Order, please. Chair recognizes the member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the applause, colleagues. Now, Mr. Chairman, I don't really propose to ask the Minister of Health any great series of questions. I think I shall deliver a lecture to her. This might be a little easier, perhaps, than having to answer a series of rhetorical questions. But I have two exhibits here in front of me, and I can table them. Let me table, first of all, this nice election pamphlet from Jane Purvis of Halifax Progressive Conservative Party about what she would do and what a John Hamm government would do if they would get into office. And secondly, this fine production today, of which I am not the author. I think you, Mr. Chairman, are, but I'm not sure. It compares new money from Ottawa for health spending in Nova Scotia from the province, and comes to the conclusion at the bottom, Tory arrogance equals priceless. And has a fine photo of the Minister of Finance with his head having grown this way, and the Premier also having grown as I think Pinocchio's nose did. So I'll table those two pieces of evidence as I proceed with my speech, and I'll pick out two more of those flyers from my collection here. And honourable members whose libraries are not very big can perhaps add those two flyers to their libraries so they may grow. Now, a book. Now, he wants the full size. I'll have to wait a while because it takes time to put a book together. Now, what do we hear? Well, we have a pamphlet from the last election and we have a pamphlet from the next election. That's what we have, I think. Now, the last election was the famous Purvis postcard. It was deposited, I've always said, into every mailbox in the province, but that's not true. It was put into every mailbox in the constituency where she was running, which I believe was Halifax, Chebucto. Was it? Citadel? Citadel. All right. I don't always get those ridings straight in Halifax because I'm not that familiar with them, not having campaigned them door by door. I see Dr. Smith looking at me with glistening eyes as if he needs me for the next campaign, but I think he runs in Dartmouth, not in Halifax. So, all right. Well, we'll get on to that, Mr. Speaker. Let's deal right now with the Department of the Estimates of Health. Yeah. Now, she told the voters of the riding where she was running that if a Conservative government got in, it would do two things. It would close the Sydney steel plant, put the lock right on the gate, and close it once and for all, and in place of the Sydney steel plant, with all the millions of dollars that closing it would save, they were going to invest those dollars into new hospital beds. So you had the caption here of closed over Cisco and open over the hospital bed. Now that was side one of the Purvis postcard. And the other side said, Progressive Conservative Nova Scotia, a John Ham government will close Cisco once and for all. Priorities matter. That was her election slogan last time. Priorities matter. Then said, stop pouring dollar signs into Cisco. Protect our health care system. Vote Jane Purvis of Halifax, Progressive Conservative Party, and even had a nice little X on the ballot to show how to do that. So that was the message. I don't think they'll deny it. It's a piece of evidence that I table in any event to demonstrate the case. Now, let us put the case to the test. Was this done? Well, that's been the question of the day here today. Was it done? And I know that other chairs have ruled that it was, I wouldn't say unparliamentary, but it was out of order to keep asking that question over and over. So I won't ask that question. I will make the statement, was it done? Because you can make a statement in the same form as a question, but put a period at the end instead of a question mark, and that makes an assertion rather than an interrogatory.
The voice inflection.
The voice inflection. He wants me to get into voice inflection. You know, in studying Chinese, they have all monosyllabic words, but they have 4 tones of voice in which you can express them. Rising, level, falling, and falling a great deal. And so by doing that, you can give every word 4 meanings.
Give me an example.
Well, I'm not going to give you an example right now because, if you were to say ni hao, that means hello.
Yes.
But if you were to say, that's Mandarin. I haven't gotten into Cantonese yet. That's another. They're all written the same, but they're said differently.
I want that below, though.
You'll find the same thing is true in Arabic, where people often say, well, I speak Lebanese or I speak Egyptian. Now, they all speak the same language in writing it, but the way you say it is different, and you have to learn each one separately. That's like English. I won't get into English, Mr. Speaker, because I wanted to speak on the health estimates of this government. But in any event, the question is, how many beds? That's what I was starting out from. How many beds did they open on account of having closed Sydney Steel? Well, there are 2 propositions here, closure and opening. Did they close? Yes, they did. How do I know? Because it's in my constituency, Mr. Speaker. It's sort of the focal midpoint of my constituency consisting of that site and everything around it on all sides. How's that for a good description of where my riding is? Did they close it? Yes. What are they doing with it now? They're tearing it down. They sold the operational part. They sold the operational part to an Indian development company by the name of Zoom. Exactly, the minister over there knows the name of Zoom Developments. That's, aha. And what are Zoom Developments going to do with the Sydney Steel Plant? Well, I'll tell you what they're going to do, Mr. Speaker. It reminds me much of the restoration of Fortress Louisbourg, where all the portions that they could excavate were picked up and identified and labeled, and each one was given a letter and a number to identify what it was. And then they were all reassembled, like a jigsaw puzzle, where you put all the pieces together to get the big picture. That's what they did at Louisbourg. Now, that's what Zoom Developments proposes to do with the Sydney Steel Plant. They're going to number all the parts, cut them apart, take them down, ship them to India, reassemble them, make steel, and guess who's going to be at the top of the customer list of Zoom Developments when they make steel? It will be Canadian Railways and other utilities that need rails and other steel products of that type to continue to operate. Why will the Sydney Steel Plant be in Hyderabad or some such place? The answer is wage costs. Because you can get, and environment. The minister over there is absolutely right. You don't have the environmental standards in India that you have here. And you don't have to pay the number of rupees per hour that you have to pay over here to work, to get all the benefits that people get over here, pensions and workers' compensation and all those types of things. You can hire people there to work for relatively little, with relatively little safety gear, with relatively little environmental protection, etc., and thereby cut costs, and thereby cut the price of the finished product, and thereby flood the market with cheap steel. So that's what's going on. That is part of the Conservative economic development strategy for Nova Scotia, Mr. Chairman. And to illustrate that point, just look how the minister just coached me through the last 5 minutes of my speech. He knew everything I was about to say because he's been the man that was in charge of doing it. I'm just telling you about what he did. So, did they close the Sydney Steel Plant? The answer is yes, they did. Now, they're proud of it. Good. Let's examine what they did from an economic point of view. We had in Sydney a brand new blast furnace, never produced a drop of iron, never produced a single, I don't know what unit of measurement was used. I guess it might be the number of liters because it was a liquid, of liquid iron. Cost $81 million, new. It sat there, first of all, shiny and nice, and after a while, rusty and old, but it sat there for, well, from the times of the John Buchanan government till very recently. Under this government, that facility was taken apart for scrap. What did they get for the scrap of value of an $81 million blast furnace? I don't know. I don't know. But I know that in shipping scrap steel out of Sydney by the boatload, the scrap steel is first of all weighed, because you can't pick a ship out of the water to weigh it to see how much is aboard. You have to weigh the product first and then put it on the ship. So they weigh the scrap steel, and then when the total amount of weight is calculated, you multiply that by the price per ton, and then you get the value. Now, less shipping. He's right. See, he knows all of this stuff. I don't need to tell him. He can tell us. First time I've gotten this minister to open up so much since we've been sitting here in the House, Mr. Speaker, Chairman. Got to give him a chance, all right? I'll give him every chance. Not to do these bad things, but to explain how he did them. I'll give him every chance. Anyway, they sold the operational part of Sydney Steel to Zoom Developments for, I believe, $4 million and some. 4 million and what? Half? Both a half. $4,500,000 they sold the steel plant for. It makes steel. It could have been operated right here, but instead they'd rather see it operating in India, so it zoomed away. All right. Was the steel plant worth more than $4.5 million? I think so, Mr. Chairman. I think that an assessed value of that steel-making facility, as it was in Sydney, I don't have the assessed values here. I know there were assessments done. There was a price put on it. If my honourable friend from Cape Breton South were here today, he'd know the numbers right off the top of his head because he was the minister for that department where this minister now, or formerly sat. You're still there. What's Cecil Clark? Well, Manning will be back. Have no fear, Mr. Speaker. Have no fear. But he's the man who knows the value of the Sydney steel plant. It's a lot more than Zoom got it for. Maybe I can rest my case on that note. Oh, I shall, but in a different direction. Yeah. So I'll say that they did close Sydney Steel. They did not sell it for what it was worth. They therefore took a loss as compared to what it could have been sold for. They did not find a local developer who was prepared to run it on the site in Sydney. Johnny Abbas, for some reason, they turned away. I can't understand that one. But in any event, did they find some other developer or entrepreneur who would operate the plant in Sydney? The answer is no, they did not. Now, our government, no, we had, I wouldn't say we had suitors, that doesn't sound like the right word. We had expressions of interest. We had expressions of interest. Our government was all ready to go forward and keep the Sydney Steel Plant in operation, and the Sydney Steel Plant, Mr. Chairman, would be in operation to this day if the Liberal government was still in power. But there was that's right, yes. But there was a crew, CREW, a crew called the NDP. And they could not allow the Liberal government to remain in power. We had proposed free license plates for volunteer firemen. And that was what got the NDP so steamed up, I'm told. When they saw that in our budget, they said, we've got to vote against this budget and bring that government down. But on doing further research of the matter, I find that they had already reached that conclusion to vote against the budget before they had seen the budget and knew what was in it. If you can imagine such a thing, Mr. Speaker. This was called NDP logic in action. In action. And it was formulated by the Honourable Law Professor from Halifax, Shabakto. See, they know the writings. They're just like the minister over across my way from Digby. They know everything. They can tell us how they did it. But they pulled the rug from under our feet. I remember there was a ballot. There was a vote taken right here in this chamber. And they and the Tories voted together to bring our government down, precipitating a midsummer election when we had just had an election. 14 months before, they say, oh no, we need another election. Why, if the NDP had their way, I say, Mr. Chairman, they have an election every day of the week. Because that would make them happy. Every day of the week. Well, so they had the election, and what happened? Well, the NDP went down. They didn't go up at all. They had 19 seats, and they got down to 10. We had 19 seats, and we went down to about the same. Yes. Yeah, and we weren't counting on Heinrich Bitter-Surman to bail us out. Yeah. So, well, we're growing daily. We're growing daily. You should be, Mr. Chairman, at some of the Liberal nominating conventions that I've attended. Maybe I shouldn't get too far into that one, but I'll say that they have been very well attended, demonstrating widespread interest in the project of getting rid of this government and their allies and replacing it with the kind of government we had prior to 1999. That's what I see in my travels about the countryside. Now, I was answering the question, did they close Sydney Steel? The answer is yes. And I was explaining how they got the mandate to do that, and the answer is because of the actions of the NDP. I rest my case. Now, moving on. Did they open the new hospital beds? Where are they? Well, I'll tell you, Mr. Chairman, in the area that I come from, the area is served by two hospitals, the regional hospital in Sydney and the New Waterford Consolidated Hospital at New Waterford. Now, I haven't had too many...
40 years old this month, Bob.
How many?
It's 40 years old this month.
The New Waterford Hospital is, yes, not the region.
Ago,
yes.
April 3rd.
All right, there. He has it right to the date. See, the NDP knows what they're doing. Proof of it again. Oh, yes. They know exactly what they're doing. That's why they pulled our government down and put that Cisco closing Tory government opposite in power. That's why they did it. Now, good. The point is that the New Waterford Hospital and the one in Glace Bay and the one on the north side, all three of them, are in a constant state of turmoil because they do not know from day to day whether they will continue to exist or not. That's the climate of opinion that this government has mobilized, has generated. Now, some may say, well, it was just as bad under the Liberals. No, it wasn't, Mr. Chairman. It wasn't at all. When our government came to power in 1993, there was a secret plan that had been formulated by Donald Cameron and company, providing for massive hospital closures and cuts all across Nova Scotia. A secret plan that was never made public by the Conservative Party, but I've tabled it here in this legislature several times. It is genuine. It did come from the Department of Health, and I got it from the new Liberal Minister of Health of the time, Dr. Ron Stewart, who came to me with this big pile of paper and said, "What's this?" I said, "Let me see it and I'll tell you." And I got it and I read it, and it said, "Closure plan, top secret. Hospitals of Nova Scotia, 29 or 30 pages of all the cuts. They were even going to close the All Saints Hospital in Spring Hill because they were against All Saints. Don't know why, but that's a Conservative mentality, you see. So they had all these plans, and one was certainly to close the New Waterford Consolidated Hospital, not just in part, but totally, and to bulldoze the site, just like the Conservatives did to Sydney Steel. They've done exactly the same thing there. They've closed the hospital, I should say the steel plant, and they're bulldozing the site right now with their friends from Zoom. Well, Zoom will be at it. They'll wait until after the election to allow the Zoom people to get to work. I know. All right. Now, where were we? We're talking about the hospital in New Waterford, and it's being in a constant state of uncertainty. But the Liberal government, when it came to power in 1993, stopped these Conservative plans to close all these hospitals around Nova Scotia, and instead demonstrated leadership in trying to reform our healthcare system here in Nova Scotia in a very massive way. Now, I know that I've often talked about the ambulance service under that heading, because it struck me as so strange that because my good friend from Timberley Prospect happened to own a 45-yard-long Cadillac limousine and a bucket of paint, if he painted it white and put a red cross on each side, he would then come out as Bill's Ambulance Service Limited. It was legal. It was the practice in those times. When we came to power, we set up the Eastern Emergency Health Service ambulance program with trained operators, proper vehicles, licensed, inspected. They even have their safety inspection stickers up to date on their windshields, you know, and we're running an ambulance service of a professional type here in Nova Scotia now. Who did that? It was done by Dr. John Savage and Dr. Ron Stewart. That's who did it. It wasn't done by Donald Cameron, Roger Bacon, or any of their illustrious predecessors. Now, that's one thing we did in health. Another thing we did was to keep the New Waterford Hospital open. I'll tell you that Russell McNeill represented that area during most of those years, together with myself, and we worked very hard to try gradually to get that hospital brought back to full capacity, full operational capacity. There was a time when, with a 3-story building, one of the 3 floors was completely empty. And they had to heat it and had to insure it against damage by fire, but there wasn't anybody in it, one of the 3 stories. And through the work of Russell McNeill and myself, that I don't want to speak on at great length, we persuaded the government of the day, the Liberal government of the day, to put hospital beds into that floor and so make the hospital fully operational for the first time in many, many years. That's what the Liberals did for New Waterford and area. Now, I trust that we did the same thing for Glace Bay, Mr. Chairman. You perhaps can decide on that more than I can. But I thought, viewing it from afar, that the record looked pretty good. It looked a lot better than it did under the Conservatives. Now, the Conservatives got back in thanks to the NDP in 1999. Since that time, I've heard... Explain what? I just did. If you were asleep during that time, I can't help it. Yeah. Now, he can read Hansard, exactly. If he can't read Hansard, you teach him to read, and then he'll be able to read Hansard. All right, now let's get back to the estimates, Mr. Chairman. I thought he was going outside. All right, Rabbit, I'll be quiet. Now, where was I? I was talking about what the Conservatives have done since 1999, when they got into power thanks to the NDP. And what they have done has been to reverse things. Just as with a car, when you change the gears from going forward to reverse, it backs up. Well, the Tories have done the same thing to the healthcare system. They've slammed the whole system into reverse. And now it's backing up instead of going ahead when it should be going ahead. And in New Waterford, Northside, and Glace Bay, the prevailing sentiment is that the people are not sure that as long as that crowd remains in power, they will be able to have their hospital. They think it may be closed, maybe the day after the election. Maybe Zoom developments will be sent out to Glace Bay after they're through at Sydney, and they can do the same thing out there they did to the steel plant and take it apart piece by piece and put it on the next boat to India and set it up at Madras or Calcutta, and then they'll have a new hospital there, thanks to this government. I don't know. How could I know based on their past record? It ain't reassuring. It's not reassuring. Now, the question is, have they carried out the intent of this message? And the answer is yes, in part. They have done A, but not B. That's the verdict. So, what more can I say? Well, I could say the $155 check is supposed to obviate all that and just vote for the people that gave you the check. Don't bite the hand that feeds you. Well, I got another piece of literature in my mailbox today, above and beyond. Well, I didn't get this one. Somebody else got that one, but they passed a copy of it on to me. That's how sharing the good news, he says. See how proud they are of what they've done, how they closed that steel plant in Sydney? This flyer here refers to the new money for health from Ottawa, $140.3 million, and is broken down by category: $75 million CHST supplement, $30 million health reform fund, $15 million for medical equipment, and $20 million in additional CHST 2000 health award. Now that money, that new money for health, was matched by a corresponding contribution of $300,000 from the province of Nova Scotia. Ottawa gives $140.3 million. Nova Scotia gives $300,000. Now that's the difference between the Liberal federal government and the Tory provincial government. And maybe I can rest my case again on that point, that they are not doing what they ought to be doing. These numbers prove it. And I know that these numbers are very well researched, Mr. Chairman, so I shall say no more on that. But the concluding bottom line here is that the total price tag of Tory arrogance is priceless. And just to illustrate that point, there's a magnified photo of the Premier and the Minister of Finance, showing the Minister of Finance in particular suffering from somewhat of a swollen head. That's just what the photo says. I'm not saying that he has that. I'm saying the photo says that, shows that. So, we can see from this short oration, something of the hollow nature of the Conservative claims to having done a good job in government. Now, I know they're just about to get out to the hustings and they're getting all their signs cleaned off from last time and their stakes sharpened, resharpened, so that they're ready to go to work once again. They had a version of this last time and they're planning version 2 in a couple of weeks. As soon as you get your $155 check, the next day you're going to get a free book in the mail. Strong Leadership and a Clear Course, Volume 2. Well, another bestseller, they think. I don't think that the record, as I've explained it in this short speech, illustrates something worthy of support, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman. And I would say that we in the Liberal Party, and we've had our ups and downs, no denial of that. We'd be in government right now if we hadn't had our downs. But we are ready and willing to provide a team to Nova Scotia for their endorsement at the polls that will do a better job than the crowd across the way. Now, what more could I say? That's a question. I'm here to ask questions. But I think the answer is self-evident, and I hope it will be shown on Election Day. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The other day I asked the Minister with regards to the air ambulance program and the fact that the Department of Health took over that service. And at that time she indicated, contrary to what the department had contemplated, a reduction in the cost of service, that actually had increased. I'm asking if, in fact, the Minister has had an opportunity to secure those figures, and could she provide them to the committee?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, I did table the answer to that question earlier, but I will read from when the province EHS took over operations from the private operator in March of 2001. We did not expand administration and saved $160,000 in STARS management fees. That being said, costs have increased since that time because of wage settlements, 100 additional missions, insurance cost increases, fuel price increases, and also Canadian Helicopters Limited now function as the employer of the flight crew. That's one person to manage roughly $60,000, but there are no new Department of Health employees. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Cape Breton West.
Yes, well, Mr. Chairman, would the Minister simplify all that and please tell us what's the bottom line? How much more did we pay, or are we paying than we did before it was taken over by the Department of Health?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
In terms of the actual operations, we're paying less. In terms of the increased costs, and increased missions, we're paying more. Obviously, if you're flying 100 more missions, that's going to cost more than 100 fewer. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, but the Minister still hasn't answered the question. What's the bottom line? At the end of the day, how much more money have we expended than previously?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
I'll have that for the member in a few minutes when I get the right page. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Cape Breton West.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman. I was looking at the supplement for the public accounts for the last 2 years. I know the for the supplement of public accounts for the year 2001, the total communications or expenditure by the Department of Health to the Communications Nova Scotia was approximately $100,000, and the supplement for the 2002 supplement, it was well over $700,000, more like about $720,000. Why the substantive increase in communications expenditure?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the reason for that addition, largely, except for 3% wage increases for people there, is an additional person. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Cape Breton West.
Well, heavens, Mr. Speaker, an increase of $600,000. I hope we didn't hire somebody at the at the cost of about $600,000, saving and accepting the 3% increase in wages. Could the minister clarify with more detail as to why, the expenditure was over $600,000 more than the previous year?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, I must have missed the original question. I thought the question had to do with communications and the increase in communications over last year, and that increase is $100,000, not $600,000 or $700,000. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Cape Breton West.
Yes, that's within the Department of Health. That's for staffing. But the amount of money that was paid out to Communications Nova Scotia, as demonstrated in the supplement, there was an increase of $620,000 there. Why the substantive increase?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, there was a change in the way that Communications Nova Scotia and the various departments did the billing. It used to be that certain communication staff were counted as department employees. Now they're counted as communication staff employees. So we account for paying Communications Nova Scotia for the staff, and that's why the increase. It's not $600,000 worth of new people. It's a change in how the system works. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Minister for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we were to make the average pay of, let's say, $40,000 per communications officer, which I think is a reasonable figure, you're looking at about 15 communications personnel that would be transferred from the Department of Health over to Communications Nova Scotia. Is the minister telling members of the committee that we've transferred approximately 15 employees, the equivalent of 15 employees, over to Communications Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Chair, I don't believe at any point in the last year or two that we've had 15 communications persons in the health department. So I will endeavor to get more detail, but I will say that the change in the way that they are paid and how it is billed is accurate. That has happened within the last year, I believe, perhaps the last year and a half.
Member for Cape Breton West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, but the minister still hasn't answered the question. She can't account for the increase of the $600,000 and some thousand dollars, $620,000. First, she was saying that it was because those employees were transferred over to Communications Nova Scotia and a change in the billing process, and then with the 3% increase in wages. But we haven't been able to quantify where that $620,000 has been expended, or how, why it's been charged back to the department from Communications Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
On the other, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were in that year and other expenses besides people. And for example, creative services, publications, media monitoring, printing and stationery costs, and other support services. There would be some advertising included in that. And these also are part of the expenses of what we would pay to Communications Nova Scotia. I mean, just, for printing documents and so on would be around $400,000 on its own.
You okay?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would the minister be kind enough to table what documents were supposed to have been printed for the $400,000? initially she was saying it was for wages and the cost of living and the transfer of employees from one department to the other, and now she's saying the lion's share of that is for the printing of pamphlets. So we'd like to know, is it some kind of a health promotion situation here, or what's the situation?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, the member has asked for a humongous task, which we will try to do, but the printing of documents for the health department in any year. First of all, it doesn't include anything we did this year because the public accounts reflect, a previous year. But it's everything that you would print to do with public health, for example. All the public health information that goes out to doctors' offices and drugstores and so on and so forth from the Department of Health about, diseases or procedures or whatever is included in the publications that we have printed for us, done by Communications Nova Scotia. So, there is nothing underhanded going on here in terms of, the publication of documents. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I didn't suggest that anything was underhanded about the process at all. If the minister is feeling a little chippy about it, I don't know what the rationale would be. But all I wanted was just some explanation on why the rather excessive expenditure from the previous year. So I'll take that on notice for provision, at least an outline of what that $620,000 in additional dollars would mean. Would the minister be kind enough to indicate if there, obviously with a department of this size, there are always individuals and situations that arise within the Department of Health that would lend to litigation against the Department of Health or various district health authorities. Would the minister be able to apprise members of the committee as to how many cases are now pending against the department and/or the various health authorities?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, we can supply that information. We don't have it with us. There are some cases pending against us, but we can get that information from legal services. The number, may change from day to day. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Cape Breton West.
Would the minister be able to give us some indication on an annual basis how many lawsuits would be generally pending before the department? I'm sure her staff would have, some general idea of how many cases would be pending before the department.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Do we know that, Cheryl?
Under Department of Justice, isn't it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, we do not have that information. That our legal services would have that. It may be available at the Department of Justice, but we can get the information in very short order. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could the minister apprise members of the committee as to how many cases have been settled in the last year?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we do have our Chief Financial Officer here, and he would be made aware of cases that had a financial implication. He is not aware of any cases settled in the last year that have a financial implication for the department. But again, we will get back to you with that information. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Cape Breton West.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I notice there's a considerable expenditure of dollars for legal services, I would presume, because they're for different law firms across Nova Scotia, well into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I would ask perhaps if we could get a thumbnail sketch of what that represents. I mean, we don't seem to know how many lawsuits are pending, what cases have been settled or what. It seems like, that it would be justified to have an explanation as to what all these legal expenses are for.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And no, not all the legal services required for the department would have to do with lawsuits or pending lawsuits, although that would be a part of it. We use legal advice for rewriting acts, rewriting regulations. We use them for advice on labor negotiations considerably. Those are among the services that we purchase. We have our own people, and we use outside services as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Perhaps I could take on notice if the minister would be kind enough to give us some more detail on the total legal expenditure by the department for legal services, and if possible, a breakdown on that detail. I know it's outlined in the supplement as to what the law firms and the amounts, but it doesn't give any detail as to what. And I don't want to get into micromanagement, but at the same time, periodically we hear through media reports about different individuals that have considerable concern about the way they feel they may have been treated in a particular case or what have you, and I'd be absolutely surprised to think that there weren't some legal matters that were pending that would cause some consternation for the department, and we don't hear too often about how they're settled. And I think it would be refreshing for the taxpayers to know exactly whether there's a growing trend towards litigation on health-related matters, or if in fact it's the same as it always was for the last 10 to 20 years.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, we will supply that information, but in terms of a growing trend towards litigation in all of our society, and certainly against medical professionals, that is absolutely true. But there are many cases launched against, for example, doctors or a hospital or even a nurse that would not be against the Department of Health, and therefore would not be cases that we would be dealing with. So they might be, but they may not be. Not all litigation would see its way into something that the Department of Health would have to deal with per se. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
A question I asked on a previous day to the Deputy Minister of Health when he appeared before Public Accounts was the average age of doctors in Nova Scotia, and if you could give us some breakdown in periods of in 10-year segments, age-wise, let's say from 25 to 35, 35 to 45, 45 to 55, and so on. So we get an idea of the detail, and I haven't been able to secure that information. That's well over a year ago, and I would think that the Department of Health should be able to provide that information. Would the minister give an undertaking that she will provide that information?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I know there was an HRDC study being done, and I believe that study is completed now. So it probably will not be difficult to get that information, but it's obviously not something that we have here in the estimate books. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can appreciate it not being there with their estimates books, but in dealing with a broad range of health-related matters, I think would be a matter of considerable importance that we know that information, because from time to time we hear doctors saying that they're overworked, and they get to a certain age, they're like any other professional, you know, they like to kind of cut back on their workload and so on. And I'm asking the minister if she will provide that detail within a reasonable period of time. So,
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I believe I already said that I would provide that information. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
yes, Mr. Speaker, one of the complaints that I have in my constituency is the number of acute care beds versus tertiary beds. You know, could the minister give us some indication as to the status of acute care beds in Nova Scotia? Do we have more acute care beds today than we did, let's say, 5 years ago when the government came to power, or do we have less? And perhaps if you could give us some indication of that in relation to the total bed count.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I know that that we have more critical care beds than we did 3 years ago. But again, I would have to get back to the member with the details of how many beds in what category we have, you know, in each of the DHAs. It is, you know, not a number that that I have memorized. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the minister for her response. Not being a healthcare professional myself, and I don't understand all the technical jargon or the lingo, so to speak. And sometimes I find it a little difficult to differentiate between acute care and tertiary care and that sort of thing. The bottom line is, can you give me, for the Cape Breton district in particular, the total number of beds, you know, and that's including the regional hospital, the community hospitals, you know, like Glace Bay General and the Waterford North Side, and so on. Give me the total number of beds that we have today as opposed to 4 years ago. And perhaps if that number is available province-wide, I would appreciate that as well. And I suspect the minister's budgets will be on again tomorrow, and I'm not sure if that's too short a notice. If we could have that information by tomorrow, I would certainly appreciate it.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We will try to have it by tomorrow, and if not tomorrow, by Monday. We've been, you know, relatively swift with responses so far. But we'll get the beds for each DHA and divided by category. That's, I take it, what the member would like to see, particularly for his district, but then for all the other districts as well. And it may take until Monday to do that, but we will try to have it by tomorrow.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Another issue of concern that is in a number of the hospital settings in the jurisdiction or the district that I represent is the waiting time. The waiting time seems to be going up, not down. And I think in part because I don't know if it's a scheduling issue or staffing issue at the hospital or what. And this, I'll take a moment just to clarify, it's no way any reflection about the quality of service that is being provided, because the staff is second to none, whether it be the cleaning staff, whether it be the nursing staff, the kitchen staff, the doctors, the lab technicians, or administration. They all do an excellent professional job with the resources that they have to work with. So I wanted to put that on the table, and it doesn't matter which facility. That's my experience. But it seems that the waiting time seems to be increasing. I know a constituent of mine had to attend one of the regional facilities here in Halifax, again with excellent service, but unexpectedly had to go over for outpatients, and I believe it was 5 or 6 hours, the waiting period. And it was in the evening, it was late in the evening, but to me that seems like a long period of time. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but if the minister could give us some indication of what is the average waiting period for each hospital? I'm sure the local...
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. Thank you. The member for Cape Breton West has the floor.
Good chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But if it's possible, if we could, it may be a question of securing that information from the regional districts. If we could have some indication or have some detail as to what the waiting time is for each of these jurisdictions, each of these hospitals, so we can determine as to whether there's an imbalance in certain regions of the province that we may have to deal with.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the issue of wait times is something the department's been working on for a while now, and it is a lot more complex than just what are the wait times. There are different wait times for different procedures. There are any number of different kinds of wait times, whether it's for an MRI or a CT scan or bone densitometry, or whether it's for elective surgery of heart surgery or some other kind of surgery. So member opposite has had, the question is one that would fill, the answer to which would fill several volumes of material. And in point of fact, we don't even have all that information in a standard way in order to be able to measure it. That is one of the pieces in the information puzzle that still needs a huge amount of work. It's not even, the different hospitals and districts don't even measure wait times the same way. So in some cases, you're comparing apples and oranges. And we can certainly supply information on wait times that we know are accurate, that compare apples to apples, that we actually know. For example, we know quite a bit about the wait lists for various kinds of cardiac surgery at the QE2, and we know why they have grown so long. And that is partly because of improved procedures that allow more people to have the procedures. So it's a case where, in that particular case and in many other cases, an improvement in healthcare actually creates a longer wait list. And it's not a concept that's necessarily well understood. But for example, to give an extreme example, if 20 years ago you were waiting for cataract surgery, you might or might not have had a very long wait because only certain people were given cataract surgery, and it wasn't possible to do on other people, and it was a very long, complex process that people were hospitalized some length of time for. Now it is routinely done on an outpatient basis on hundreds, thousands and thousands of people who 20 years ago the operation wouldn't even have been done on them. So again, there may or may not be a wait list there depending on where the service is offered. But is it reasonable, and is it a result of bad management or lack of money, or is it a result of improved service, as in the case of the cardiac care? So we will give you what information we have, but I can tell all members of the House that this is a very, very complex project, and we're only partway there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have to say one thing. I'm a little disappointed because not that the minister hasn't been giving me the best information that she can possibly provide, But what she's saying is different than what her predecessor said and what the Premier has said publicly. And that is that waiting times are down. And she's saying here today, in some cases, because of improved service and improved technologies, that waiting times may be longer. So it begs one to wonder, how can the Premier and her predecessor come up with the conclusion that healthcare is better because the waiting times are less? And the Minister and I agree that it's far more complex than just simply saying right across the board, you know, for whether it be an MRI or eye surgery or organ transplant or whatever. I understand all that, but we spent a lot of money, and it was started under the previous Liberal administration, over the last 4 years, improving our information systems. And the Deputy Minister appeared before Public Accounts and went to great lengths to expand on that. So the Minister now is telling me that she doesn't have sufficient information systems to be able to determine how we can measure these waiting times. So I'm quite concerned. What's the status of our information systems, and how much has been spent on it in the last 4 years, and how would she rate where we are on the scale of our information systems? Because that was the issue that the Conservative caucus, when they were in opposition, day in and day out. You know, I remember the health critic at the time from Kings County, then member, the Honourable George Moody, who was a Minister of Health in his previous life. That was their biggest concern. And now the Minister is saying we're back to square one. So how much money has been spent on this information systems? And when can we expect to be able to measure improvements in our healthcare system and ultimately improved cost efficiency? And that's what I'm getting at, value for dollar.
Chair. And
Minister of Health.
there was no standardized information, and there isn't yet enough standardized information on wait lists to be able to give an informed, comprehensive answer to the member's question the way he wants it. Information systems in themselves are not going to get to the basics of how wait lists are measured. That is a human function that has to be recorded in an information system. Again, I will have to get back to the member about how much has been spent on information systems in general in the last 4 years, because we don't have the 4-year rolling figure here. We have just the year to year. But we can get back on that. But there are many kinds of different information systems, including a major one that is being rolled out in the Guysborough Cape Breton area this year. And the information systems will be about many things, not just about wait lists. Patient information. Patient information is not about wait lists, but it's one of the things that we want to be able to provide for people. You know, complete patient records that would be available to all healthcare providers across the province is one of the major aims of this information system. And you know, we're doing fairly well in Nova Scotia relative to the rest of the country, but it is a huge project. I mean, it's a $4 billion project nationwide, and these systems are very, very expensive. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Time has expired for that member. The Chair will now recognize the Honourable Member from Cape Breton, the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The time is 5:18. 4:18, I'm sorry. Oh, yes, it is, 5:18.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Minister. My first question, I guess, to the minister. I don't have a preamble and not much of a camera person, so I get right to the point, Minister. My first question is, I've had many calls from seniors in my constituency in regard to a $6 fee for blood tests in other parts of the province. I guess my question, I would ask the minister whether she intends to make this a universal fee on blood services at local hospitals throughout Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
We didn't set the fee to start with, the district did.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And no, the fee for blood collection that is being charged at various clinics or in some cases mobile clinics around the province is really a fee for convenience. There is no charge if you go to the hospital to get your blood taken. And that is as true in your area or as it is in mine. If you have the $6 and you prefer the convenience of having the service done at a clinic, then there is a fee for that. But if you can't afford that, or you choose not to, you simply go to the hospital and have your blood taken there, and it doesn't cost anything. It was not a service that was mandated by the Department of Health. It's done in various districts because some people prefer the convenience, but it is not mandated, and it won't be mandated. And the fee for blood collection, in any hospital is $0. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Chair recognizes the member for Cape Breton, the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My next question is, I'm wondering on hepatitis C, teenage pregnancy, those sort of statistics. Does your department keep a record of communities that have, statistics that affect in regard to teenage pregnancy and that sort of thing? Does your department keep a record of this, compile a record?
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Figures for teen pregnancies, those figures are not kept at the department. They would be at the local district level. The issue of patients with a disease such as hepatitis C, which is what they call a notifiable disease. We would have those statistics at the department. We do have those statistics at the department through the public health department. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Member from Cape Breton Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my question now, Minister, are these files reviewed before you make any major decisions when you cut programs from hospitals?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Statistics that are pertinent, and we would get data, we would also get it from other sources.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's two parts of the answer to that question. One is that anything that we decided as a department that we would cut or not increase funding to, sometimes lack of increase is called a cut, is based on the best evidence available, and usually it's very good evidence, of whether or not a program is working or needed or can be offered in some alternative way. The second part of the answer to that question is at the district level, there may be a decision to cut a program or a service. And that may be something that the district has the best information on, but that is not usually done. I don't know if it's ever done, but it's certainly not usually done without us being advised in the department, or the decision having gone through the business planning process, whereby the districts, say what they're going to do with their money and how. And oftentimes a proposal would come forward for cutting a service somewhere or a program somewhere that the department doesn't believe should be cut. And so then we would take that back to the district and say, no, you can't do that. Let's look somewhere else. Or if there's no alternative, then there have been times when the department has provided funding. But sometimes there are programs that an individual hospital or district may very well want to cut, to not see as very important to their mandate, but that the department does. So there are some fairly good checks and balances in the system. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. The honourable member from Cape Breton, the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to ask my next question is in regard to supplies at hospitals. Do you regularly review supplies, or do you leave that up to the district authority? And I guess, Mr. Chair, while I'm on my feet, if you could explain just what process that you allot money to departments in regard to supplies. And I'll tell you why I'm questioning. I visited a hospital on the mainland, actually. I don't want to say which hospital, but there was an emergency happened in that particular community, and it was an eye injury. And when the young gentleman got to the hospital, he had to cut a styrofoam cup, the bottom of it, and put it on the gentleman's eye and send him on here to Halifax. They had to tape it on with black tape. And that story came directly from the gentleman's father. So, my concern is, why are nurses and healthcare professionals that don't have the tools to do their work? And why do some hospitals seem to have supplies, and in other districts, they don't have any supplies? Could the minister explain, please?
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Basic supports, it's rare to my knowledge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the decision on allocating supplies at the district would be made at the district level. That would not be made at the level of the health department. I mean, they have a better idea of what might be needed at individual hospitals. They would have, figures on that. Like, they would generally know, how many syringes, they usually use at a hospital in a given, day or week or month. So it's generally speaking. We know hospitals have to have supplies, like schools have to have supplies, everybody has to have supplies. And part of the 7% increase that we're giving to the DHAs is to support inflation on basic supplies. That we know that they're going to need that, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. The honourable member from Cape Breton, the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could the minister explain if there's been an inventory taken in the various districts in regard to supplies for hospitals in particular?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Purchasing departments.
Mr. Speaker, that would be strictly a function at the district level. They have purchasing departments in the hospitals and the DHAs, and they know what they need, and that is something that there's no need for the department to get involved in such a basic business function. What we want to make sure they follow purchasing policies of the department, and we have been pushing and succeeding in many cases in getting group purchasing to try to make the cost of supplies as reasonable as it can be. But that's our function in that area, is simply trying to help them with bulk buying and purchasing, and they make the actual decisions at that level. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Chair recognizes member from Cape Breton and the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm getting a little baffled here. There's been no inventory taken. Minister, if you could you please explain how you came to the 7%, that figure? How did you arrive at that figure for an increase in supplies to medical facilities? Where did that 7% come from, Minister?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. The 7% increase is not just for supplies, but supplies would be included in that 7% increase. The 7% was arrived at largely through taking a 4-year average of what the increased costs were, and at least that's the essence of it. And their increased cost, these are all non-staff costs, okay? The 7% increase, we have guaranteed them that, plus we have said the salary increases would be on top of that. So, supplies obviously would be included in that, but there are other costs besides included in non-staff costs, and supplies would be one of them. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister, for that clarification. The Chair will recognize member from Cape Breton and the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm still a little baffled, Minister, and I know I'm probably beginning to confuse the question, but I'm still confused, Mr. Chair. You come up with a 7% increase in a budget that you did no inventory before. I have a hard time understanding how you, as the minister, could be aware of the need of supplies in hospitals if you didn't look at the file or you didn't have the information in front of you to know what these facilities require. So I guess perhaps to save more confusion, I'll ask the minister very clearly. And I will say this first before I ask her. Many facilities in this province in the last 2 years have asked for extra supplies and were denied because there was no money to buy these supplies. So I guess my question to the minister is will she make the undertaking? If the 7% is not enough for some reason, will it be increased to 10% or 9% or 8%, whatever is required to ensure that these medical facilities do, in fact, have medical supplies for when they're required? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, member. The Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, we came up with the 7% on non-staff costs through looking at financial statements from the DHAs and the hospitals, not through doing an actual inventory ourselves. We don't micromanage to the extent that we're sending out inspectors to do inventories of the supplies in all the hospitals in Nova Scotia. There are financial statements. There's external accreditation. You take those financial statements and you look at average increases, say, in fuel costs. That would be another example of a non-staff cost. And you can see that on average, fuel costs are going up by whatever, and that is factored into the 7%. And so are supply costs. And you also have to anticipate a certain amount of new supplies to go with perhaps procedures that are becoming more common that weren't before. But there's a lot of information, financial information, that is gathered together by the department, and people went over that and came up with a 7% figure that would, guarantee the DHAs that much in non-staff costs each year. And then, we left the salary component out of it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. The honourable member from Cape Breton Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, but that's fine. I can understand. I never suggested that we send out auditors or somebody in to check supplies in every hospital. I know, you know, this is a modern rural minister. It's 2003. We do have technology in this province, and I think, you know, for the most part, you're aware of that because you do put some of it to good work. In regard to the 7%, I want to leave the 7% if I can. Is the 7%, is it locked in? Are you prepared to increase it if healthcare facilities request more money for supplies, for this item, the 7%? Are you prepared to put more than 7% if it is required?
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Health.
I see it as appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And obviously, if you're doing, you know, planning for 3 years and you've got good data to begin with, which we do, we think the 7% is adequate, and the DHAs think it is adequate too for those things. That's not to say that more money wouldn't be allocated for other things. For example, the mental health programming that we just announced, that is money that comes out of the Department of Health budget, even though the work being done is going to be done in the DHAs. When those are successful, that money will be rolled into their budgets. And it won't be held centrally. So if something happens in a particular area that for some reason more money is required, we're always prepared to look at that. I mean, if we had an outbreak of SARS, for example, somewhere in the province, which we haven't had and hopefully won't have, it's pretty obvious that some hospitals or a DHA might incur a lot more costs than another DHA for that reason. And of course, you know, we'd have to look at, you know, providing the funding for that. So obviously we are open to reviewing it, but in terms of feeling that 7% is adequate, except for emergencies, we do feel it is adequate. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Chair recognizes the member from Cape Breton, the Lakes.
Does the minister realize that there's hospital foundations in this province that are actually paying and supporting oil bills, heating bills for hospitals? Is the minister aware of that?
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And no, that would be unusual for a hospital foundation, and I was not aware that any hospital foundation was paying regular oil costs. That's part of what the 7% was meant to cover. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member from Cape Breton, the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I might as well move along, I guess. Anyway, travel is always an issue for my residents. Travel, you know, particularly for medical appointments and commitments up here in Halifax, but the wait times are exorbitant. Like, I know one lady that waited 16 months to come up here for heart surgery, and actually it was only testing. And she waited 16 months. And I have a resident that lives in my area that had a back surgery, you know, last fall. The similar surgery that the Premier had, and she waited close to 2 years to get up here. So, Minister, this is a major issue for the people I represent, and I want to make that very clear. And I want to ask, what do you plan? What can you do? Do you have any do you have any resources at your that are available to you that would help, you know, people live in stress, that this creates stress within families, and people are concerned, particularly when it's a major illness. So, Minister, you know, I don't know if you have the resources at hand, but would you commit to at least reviewing the process and improving the wait times?
Thank you, Member. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are some wait times that we're able to do something about right away. The cardiac surgery being one. The next one that we're going to be looking at is orthopedic surgery. This, it is an issue in Nova Scotia. It is also an issue across the country. And there are, different ways to deal with it, but we do recognize that particularly with orthopedics, the waiting list is too long. We were dealing with cardiac care first. It will involve money, obviously, everything does. But there are ways that perhaps we can do it more efficiently, using operating rooms at night, for example.
Provincial wait list.
Having a provincial wait list that would be able to prioritize the urgent care better. We don't have a provincial wait list right now for orthopedic surgery. There are wait lists around in each area, each hospital, and if we had a provincial wait list, we'd certainly be able to prioritize the more urgent cases much better than we can right now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member from Cape Breton, the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank the Minister for the reply, and I appreciate her attention to this subject because it is a major issue, particularly for people that live outside of Halifax. This year, there's been no increase for in-home support. In-home support programs in Cape Breton have now a waiting list from here to the street, Madam Minister. Do you have any plans to deal with this issue?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, the issue of in-home supports came up earlier. And although we're in favor of the program, we're unable to provide more funding to it this year. So these, with a couple of exceptions, the people who are on it will continue to receive it. Young people who are receiving service from community service now, who reach the age of 19, will come to us, and they will be included in it. And we have an expanded equipment program with the Red Cross, which is going to be able to help out some of these people with the actual equipment supports they may need. But in terms of having the funds this year to expand the program, no, it's going to have to stay the way it is. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member from Cape Breton, the Lakes.
I'm disappointed to hear that, Mr. Chair, and I guess my next question to the Minister is very clear. You just came back a month, perhaps 3 weeks ago or a month ago from Ottawa, and there's a new pack, and you got new money for health from Ottawa, and an increase. I guess my question to you, Minister, is is every red nickel that you're receiving from under this new arrangement that you and the Premier negotiated with Ottawa, every red nickel, is it going to be spent in the Department of Health this year?
Thank you, Member. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Yes, Mr. Chair, and it will be spent on health care. That will be spent and more. So that was never an issue. That was something that the Premier committed to, I committed to, and the Finance Minister committed to. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member from Cape Breton, the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The previous government in 1999 approved projects in Sydney Mines, Miners Manor, and in North Sydney at the Northside Guest Home. This riding is now Cape Breton North. Both of those facilities are located within Cape Breton North. However, the residents that I represent are also served by those facilities. Now, the hospital down there, we've seen, 2 floors changed, a ramp, everything has been just, I don't know, there's a lot of vacant space in that hospital now, Minister. Anyway, we're using the hospital, we're told, the community's being told, as a temporary respite area, most people call it, but it is a nursing home that the floor has been changed in the Northside General. So I guess my question is, do you intend to build any nursing homes or put any additions on the nursing homes? Is that part of your plan for health for Nova Scotia?
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we do know that the demand for nursing care beds in the Cape Breton district is the most urgent in the province. We did authorize the use of that space for that purpose. But in terms of new nursing home beds, Cape Breton is the priority area. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member from Cape Breton, the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is what I would suggest as an urgent concern in the community. So I would ask if the minister has a timetable when she feels that she will be secure enough in her position, I guess, or stabilize the department. I don't, doesn't matter how you put it. I just want to know when if you recognize the problem, obviously, and when will you be dealing with this issue? When can the residents that require nursing homes in my area, when can they expect to see this development?
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Recommendation coming up in probably several months.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we have a joint team composed of members of the department and the DHA working on that right now. We haven't received a recommendation from them yet, but we expect to in the next couple of months. And that recommendation would involve the numbers and kinds of beds that they see as needed and where. And once we get those recommendations, we would have to look at them. And as I say, I mean, there's a fair bit of pressure from other areas for nursing home beds, including Halifax. But we do know that the most urgent need is in Cape Breton. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Chair recognizes a member from Cape Breton, the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do appreciate the reply the minister provided. Ambulance bills, Minister. Have you signed a new contract with EMO since your government took over the Department of Health? Since '99, when your government was elected, is there a new EMO contract in place since then?
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe the member means EMC, Emergency Medical Care, and the contract has been extended. To the best of my knowledge, we haven't signed a new contract since we came to government, but we have extended the existing contract. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member from Cape Breton Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so what I want to be clear, Madam Minister, the contract has not been altered. There's been nothing added. There's no clauses put in. It is the exact same agreement that was in place in 1999 that it is today. Is that correct?
Thank you, member. Chair recognizes the Minister of Health.
Just performance-based and motivates that.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, the contract with EMC is performance-based, and they have, met the criteria that way. I mean, obviously, there have been negotiated salary increases since then, so those items have changed. We're not aware of any substantive changes to the contract, but I will certainly go back and have a look. I mean, perhaps there have been a few, but nothing substantial. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member from Cape Breton Lakes have some further short snappers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Prior to, I guess my question, Minister, I deal regularly with bills for ambulances. And these are the students and the seniors and the people on fixed or low income that can't afford to pay these bills. They get in an accident. One student was involved in an accident as a passenger. She was asked to sit in the ambulance. When she sat in the ambulance and stepped out, 3 days later, she got a $500 bill. Now, Madam Chair, these bills were not being sent to Nova Scotians prior to '99. Where was this theory created?
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, the cost of our ambulance fees are based on the actual cost. I mean, they're still heavily subsidized. Usually, if it's in a case of where the charge can be billed to an insurance company, then we try to recover that cost. But if a person doesn't have insurance, then a charge can be based on the personal rate, and the ambulance, the bill can also be appealed because if there are extenuating circumstances for some reason. But we are looking at trying to recover our costs, and if we can recover costs from insurance companies, then we don't have to recover the costs from the Nova Scotia taxpayer. I mean, that's the bottom line. We're not trying to cause difficulties for people who are in real difficulty. We're trying to make sure that we can recover as many costs as possible so that we can provide, the services that people need. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member of Cape Breton Lakes, I'll remind you that there's approximately 8 minutes remaining in today's estimates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess, Minister, I don't know if you understand, but I'm from an area where unemployment is high. People can't afford to pay extra bills. Now, these bills are causing stress and probably other medical expenses for the taxpayer, because people are getting counseling over this. I mean, you have to really realize the impact that this is having on our healthcare system. And most people I talk to are baffled where this fee come from. Everybody recognizes that it's important to have those ambulances on the road. And somebody has to pay for them. But people feel that they're paying their taxes and that they feel that health care should be universal here. And I don't imagine too many people would have sympathy with the insurance companies, particularly with the market out there today. However, the poor little old lady down the road that's on a fixed income, the senior that's 72 years old, that gets a bill for $500 in the mail, that can't afford to pay her oil bill this month, it has a very stressful impact on that individual. So, Madam Chair, I guess I would ask, do you have any plans in reviewing this policy and reviewing it to perhaps find out or, seek out the impact that this is really having on Nova Scotians? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'm pleased that the member recognized me as Mr. Chair, not Madam Chair this time. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, the short answer to that is no. As I say, people can always appeal. We're always willing to look at, at cases that, where the person really objects for some reason to paying the bill. But the Auditor General has looked at how we structured these fees, and he has said that it's sound. We do have one of the best ambulance services in the country, and that comes at a cost. And as well, the cost of ambulances is not covered under the Canada Health Act. It is a service we are providing, above and beyond the Canada Health Act, and we, for the most part, we have to be able to pay for, where we can, due cost recoveries. That means that other money in the system is used for services that are equally needed. And it's a fact of life that these ambulance services are very, very expensive, and we have to find a way to pay for them because they're not funded by Ottawa. And that's the answer to the question. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, member. The honourable member for Cape Breton Lakes.
Could the minister explain the criteria when you get a billing? For instance, from what I understand, Minister, what you're telling me is that, the length of travel is the cost. That's how you get billed. I guess I want to ask if there's a vehicle, if somebody's involved in a car accident tonight and there's a mother and a daughter in the car and they're both rushed to the same hospital, how many bills come out of that vehicle, Madam Minister?
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the fee structure is based on a per-person cost. It is averaged out over all the costs of the ambulances, the costs of the paramedics, and so that if that mother and daughter were rushed to the hospital or wherever, there would be 2 bills. But you're only billed if there is care provided. In other words, if someone is attending to you, doing something for you in that ambulance. So for example, if the daughter were injured and the paramedics were performing whatever procedure on her, and the mother was just there accompanying her or watching, then there would only be 1 bill. The bill would be for the injured person, not someone who was going along as a concerned parent or vice versa. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. The honourable member from Cape Breton Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Approximately 2 minutes.
I want to stick on this ambulance fee. Is the I guess my question to the minister is: the minister confident that she is aware of all the details of the fee structure? Is she aware of the structure in regard to billing for ambulances? Are you very well educated on that issue?
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, staff are very well aware of the structure, the details of all the structure of the ambulance billing, and that is what we have staff for. No, I have not memorized the fee structures of the ambulance billing. I'm aware in general of how the ambulance billing works. And for detailed information, I can get that from staff, and I can certainly get it for you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. The honourable member, you have about 30 seconds.
I'll just have a short snapper. I'm wondering if the minister receives calls from her riding in regard to this issue. Does this issue affect residents in your riding?
And ambulance fees are not based on distance. They're based on care. There are plenty of people in my riding who talk to me about ambulance fees. A lot of them have to be taken from the seniors' residence to the hospital, for example. And these kinds of, it happens all the time, yes, Mr. Chair.
It's also based on the cost of everything.
Thank you, Minister. Time has now expired for today's budget estimates. And I'm prepared to recognize the Deputy House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask that the committee now rise and report progress.
Chairman on the Committee of the Whole House on Supply reports.
Committee's met, made progress, begs leave to sit again.
Agreed? We've the Honorable Deputy Government House Leader on tomorrow's hours and business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the House now rise and to set tomorrow. The hours will be from 9 a.m. till 3. The order of the day will be daily routine, and we'll be into estimates. And when the estimates are finished, then the House will adjourn for the weekend.
Motion is the House adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. House adjourned until 9 a.m. We reached the moment of interruption. The subject for this evening's late debate was submitted by the Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview. The Honourable Member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward to the opportunity over the next few minutes to discuss this important issue. I would like to bring to the members present the resolution. Therefore, be it resolved that this government